When Faye Hollis placed a $1 bid on an abandoned 1800s farmhouse, she never imagined she'd stumble into a decades-old mystery buried beneath layers of dust, grief, and whispers. But inside this crumbling house were jars that moved, a sealed-off tunnel no one dared open, and the spirit of a forgotten girl who had never left. What she found shocked everyone and changed an entire town. But before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. Faye Hollis wasn't chasing ghosts. She just needed a place to start over. Something quiet. Something forgotten. After her divorce and the loss of her mother in the same year, she packed what little she had into the back of her rusted pickup and drove south, no destination in mind. Just a feeling pulling her forward. That feeling led her to Casa Daga, Florida, a strange little place with creaking porches, moss-draped oaks, and whispers in the wind. Locals called it the psychic capital of the world. But Faye didn't pay that any mind. She wasn't superstitious. She just wanted land, solitude, maybe a roof that didn't leak. What she found was a crumbling 1800s farmhouse on the edge of town, abandoned for decades, swallowed by trees and time. It was up for auction, starting bid $1. No one else raised a paddle. The moment she signed the papers, the old man running the auction said, "You're braver than most." She laughed it off, but the second her boots hit the porch, the air shifted, heavy, like the house had been holding its breath. And in that breath, something was still there, watching, waiting. The sun was just starting to bleed into the horizon when Faye turned the old key. It surprised her how smoothly it turned, no resistance, no gritty metal grind, like the door had been waiting for her all along. She pushed it open, slowly, and the hinges groaned like a deep sigh echoing through time. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of aged pine, mildew, and something else, something older. Not rot, not mold, something she couldn't name. She stepped into the front hallway, her boots crunching over a layer of dry leaves and broken plaster. The farmhouse was bigger than she expected, 2 stories, with a wraparound porch, a grand staircase, and ceilings high enough to echo. Dust hung in the air like mist, and the last rays of daylight pierced through a cracked window, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Faye didn't flinch. She'd been in worse places, cramped trailers, run-down motels, basements where the water heater growled louder than the thunder outside. But this felt different. It felt paused, as if life had once thrived here, then vanished mid-breath. She explored room by room. The kitchen still had pans hanging from rusted hooks. The parlor held a faded velvet loveseat, its cushions sunken like someone had just stood up. Upstairs, the bedrooms were stripped of sheets but not memories, the wallpaper peeled in delicate curls, revealing names and dates carved into the wooden beams, May 1931, Sarah and Joel. Don't forget me. She paused at that one. Something about the way those words were carved shaky. Desperate made her skin prickle. Back downstairs, she found the hallway leading toward the back of the house. At the end stood a locked door, not chained, just bolted from the outside, like someone didn't want it to open. She stared at it for a moment, hand resting lightly on the wood. The doorknob was ice cold. Faye didn't like leaving questions unanswered, so she went to her truck, grabbed her crowbar, and returned. With one loud crack, the bolt gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The temperature dropped instantly. Goosebumps rose on her arms. She fumbled for her flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing unfinished wooden steps and cobwebs strung like warning signs. The air smelled wrong, stale, but clean, like someone had sealed it off to preserve it, not to forget it. She took a breath, then stepped down. The basement was larger than she imagined, nearly the full width of the house. Concrete floor, brick walls, and in the center, a perfectly round, metal-rimmed trapdoor, flush with the ground. Faye frowned. There were no markings, no handle, just a seam. She knelt down, ran her fingers along the edge, then paused. The air felt charged. Her palm buzzed faintly like static electricity. Then came the sound. Thump! A low, rhythmic knock from beneath the trap door. Faye jumped back, flashlight trembling in her hand. Another thump! She held her breath. Waited. Silence. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Every logical part of her brain screamed, "Leave! Now!" But logic had never fixed her problems. Grit had. She backed away slowly, up the stairs, bolted the door shut again, and leaned against it, heart racing. It had to be a critter, maybe an old pipe. The house settling. But she'd been in old houses before. They groaned. They creaked. They didn't knock. That night, Faye didn't sleep. She lay on an air mattress in the front room, shotgun by her side, eyes fixed on the shadows crawling across the ceiling. The knock didn't come again, but something else did. Around 3 a.m., the smell changed. It drifted in like smoke, faint, sweet, and bitter all at once. Burnt lavender. Faye sat up, nose wrinkling. Then came the whisper. Not words, just the soft, breathy sound of someone exhaling behind her. She spun around, nothing. The front door was still locked, the windows still shut. The room was empty. But the scent remained, thick now, clinging. She waited for dawn like a soldier waits for relief, rigid, exhausted, alert. When morning light finally trickled in, she got up, splashed cold water on her face, and muttered, "Not today." Faye wasn't the type to scare easily, but she was the type to dig deeper. By mid-afternoon, she'd uncovered half the town's gossip. She drove into Casadaga and asked the owner of the antique shop about the farmhouse. The old woman behind the counter stiffened. That place, she said, should have been torn down years ago. Why wasn't it, Faye asked. The woman gave her a long, flat look, because no one wanted to touch it. Not after the Harper girl. Faye's brow furrowed. Who? The woman didn't answer. Just rang up her purchase, 2 old lanterns and a book titled The Veil Between Worlds, then whispered, "Don't go down there. Whatever's locked away wants to stay there." Faye didn't respond, but she didn't forget. That night, she returned to the basement, lantern in hand, crowbar tucked under her arm. She stood above the trap door. This time, no knock, no scent, no whispers, just silence. She crouched and began prying at the seam. It groaned open inch by inch until it revealed a narrow tunnel, descending deeper into the earth. The walls were lined with timber. The air was cold and unmoving. She lowered herself into the tunnel. 15 feet in, her lantern flickered. Then she saw it. A small room carved from stone. Inside were shelves, wooden, rotten, and on them rows of glass jars, sealed with wax. Inside each jar, something moved. Something alive. She stepped closer. The jars held butterflies, moths, beetles, all fluttering weakly as if suspended in time. And on the far wall, etched into the stone in faint, looping script, was a single sentence. She lives in the quiet. She listens in the dark. Faye's breath caught. She backed out of the tunnel, climbed the ladder, sealed the trap door, and this time she nailed it shut. because what she'd found wasn't just strange. It was impossible. And somewhere, deep down, she knew. This house wasn't abandoned. It had simply been waiting. Faye didn't tell anyone what she found beneath that trap door. Not the old woman at the antique store, not the postman who tried to make polite conversation at the edge of her gravel driveway. Not even the stray cat that started showing up each morning, curling up on her porch like it belonged to the house more than she ever would. No, what Faye had seen down there, the jars, the whisper etched into stone, the impossible fluttering of insects that should have died decades ago, wasn't something she could explain. Not out loud. She told herself it didn't matter. Maybe it was a trick, a leftover from some eccentric who used to live there. Maybe the jars were battery-powered novelties. Maybe she imagined it. But deep down, she knew. Nothing about that basement was man-made. That night, the dreams started. She was standing in the tunnel again. Only this time. There were voices, soft, echoing, like children singing underwater. She turned, lantern flickering, and saw a woman standing at the end of the tunnel. Long black hair, a white dress torn at the hem, bare feet, stained with ash. Faye couldn't move. The woman raised a hand and pointed toward her, then whispered something Faye couldn't hear. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart thudding so loud it drowned out the cicadas. The next day, she nailed the basement door shut again. Not just the trap door this time, but the door at the top of the stairs. 2 4-inch steel screws, reinforced hinges. She didn't want that door opening, not even if a hurricane blew the roof off. Still, the feeling didn't go away. It followed her, into the kitchen, where cabinet doors opened on their own, into the hallway, where the old grandfather clock started ticking again despite missing its pendulum, into her sleep, where the woman in white kept getting closer in the tunnel. By the 4th night, Faye stopped sleeping altogether. She worked instead. Sanded floorboards, scrubbed tile, rewired the porch light. The kind of hard, physical labor that reminded her of who she used to be before the house, before the dreams, before everything got weird. It worked for a while, until the knocking came back. It started just after midnight. Not from the basement this time. From inside the walls. Soft at first, like someone tapping a finger just behind the plaster. Then louder. Thump, thump, thump. Steady, measured, moving through the house. Faye stood in the middle of the living room. Breath caught in her throat. Shotgun loaded and ready. She pressed her ear to the wall. Silence. She backed away slowly. Then, from upstairs, a crash. She bolted up the staircase, nearly slipping on the worn rug, and burst into the master bedroom. It was empty, but the window which she had bolted shut was wide open, curtains blowing like breath. On the floor was a jar. One of those jars, identical to the ones in the tunnel. It wasn't there before, she was sure of it. Inside, a single black moth fluttered weakly against the glass. Faye stared at it, mouth dry. Then, for the first time in years, she spoke out loud, soft and sharp. "What do you want from me?" The moth stopped. Just stopped. It pressed its wings flat and went still. Then, the air changed. Colder, heavier. Like the house exhaled again, and this time, it wasn't alone. Faye backed out of the room, moth jar in hand, and took it down to the porch. She didn't know what else to do, so she opened it. The moth didn't fly. It crawled out, deliberate, as if it knew exactly where it was. It crept to the edge of the porch and disappeared. Not flew away. Disappeared, like it walked through the fabric of reality itself. Faye stood there in the humid night air, shaking. She didn't sleep. She didn't go back inside until dawn. When she finally stepped back through the door, the house was quiet again. But something had changed. The mirrors were different. She hadn't noticed it before, but every mirror in the house there were 5. Old and cracked and smudged were now turned to face the wall. Every single one. She walked from room to room, checking bathroom, hallway, bedroom, even the little one above the fireplace. All backwards. She hadn't done that. And the worst part, she wasn't scared anymore. She should have been. But there was something else creeping in now. Recognition? Like she'd been here before. Not in body, but in spirit. Like her arrival hadn't been random. Like she was part of something older. Maybe the woman in white wasn't a ghost? Maybe she was a memory, a warning, or an invitation. That evening, as the sun turned the sky into a smear of oranges and violets, Faye took out the old land deed she'd signed at auction. Folded in the back was a brittle map, hand-drawn, with her property lines sketched in charcoal. At the edge of the page, near the backwoods, was a symbol. Not a building. A circle. A ring of stones. She didn't remember seeing it in real life. So she went looking, through tall grass and hanging moss, past gnarled oaks and forgotten fences. She found it. Just like the map said. 12 stones, placed in a perfect circle. Burn marks in the center, long since faded, and in the middle a single word carved into the earth. Return. Faye knelt beside it, brushing dirt from the letters. Her mind raced. Was this where the jars came from? Was this the origin? Or was this something else entirely? Suddenly, a low breeze pushed through the clearing. And in the distance, she heard it again. The same soft voice from her dreams. Only this time, it spoke clearly. She listens in the dark. Faye's head snapped up. No one there. But she didn't run. She stood, staring into the trees, and whispered back. Then I'm listening. Faye Hollis had always seen herself as practical. She fixed things, took them apart, figured out what was broken, and put them back together. That's how her daddy taught her tools before tears, logic before fear. But nothing in that house could be fixed with a wrench. Not the whispers, not the dreams, not the memories that didn't belong to her but still felt like hers all the same. After finding the stone circle and hearing that voice again, Faye stopped pretending this was just an old house with a creaky foundation. Something deeper was at work. Something older than wallpaper and floorboards. And for the first time, she stopped fighting it. She started listening. She moved through the house with different eyes now. She no longer looked for broken things. She looked for clues, signs, messages. In the library, tucked behind a row of water-warped books, she found an old journal, its leather cover brittle with time, inside page after page of a woman's handwriting. Elegant, loopy, sometimes shaking. The entries were undated, but they painted a story. I see her in the mirror again. She's watching, but she never speaks. The children say she lives beneath the house, but I think she is the house. Today I buried another jar. They said it would silence the cries. It didn't. Faye read every word, and somewhere between the ink and the silence, something shifted inside her. She realized this place wasn't cursed. It was haunted by grief. A different kind of haunting, not one of chains and wails, but of echoes. The echoes of women who were never heard, of mothers who were dismissed, of daughters who disappeared. This house wasn't just old. It was a witness. And maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting for someone who would listen without fear. That night. Faye stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. One of the ones she'd found turned to face the wall. She hadn't dared turn it back until now. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. In the reflection, she saw herself. but behind her just for a second she saw her again. The woman in white, hair over her face, head tilted. Not threatening, not angry. Just waiting. Faye didn't turn around. "Instead," she whispered, "I'm not here to banish you. I'm here to understand." The air stilled. The reflection blinked. And then the mirror cracked. Not shattered, just a single jagged line from top to bottom like a scar. And Faye smiled. Because somehow she knew that was the first real answer. The next morning, she drove back into town. Not for supplies, not to run. To ask questions. She stopped at the local records office, a tiny building with a single bored clerk tapping at an old keyboard. "I'm looking for anything you've got on the Harper family," she said. The man raised an eyebrow. "That's going back a ways. What for?" She hesitated. Then said, "I live in their house now." He didn't ask more. An hour later, Faye was sitting at a dusty table, surrounded by newspaper clippings, death certificates, land deeds, and faded photographs. It was all there. The house was originally built in 1872 by Jonas and Clara Harper. They had 3 children. One daughter, Eliza Harper, went missing in 1894, never found. After that, the family stopped attending church, became reclusive. In 1897, Clara was institutionalized. The house changed hands 6 times over the next 100 years. Every owner either left suddenly or never made it out. Faye stared at Eliza's photo, a child with dark eyes and braids, holding a jar. A jar. Faye's breath caught. The article said Eliza spent most of her days in the woods collecting bugs, according to neighbors. Some believed she was strange, touched. Others claimed she talked to people who weren't there. She lives in the quiet. Suddenly, it all came together. The jars weren't traps. They were memories. Preserved. Held in place by a child who was never heard, never found, never freed. Faye sat back, hands in her hair. The woman in white wasn't a warning. She was Eliza, grown in spirit, lost in time, crying out in the only way she could through mirrors, through moths, through the bones of a house that had forgotten her. Faye closed the folder gently, returned everything she could, and drove home in silence. That night, she stood at the trap door again, lantern in one hand, a photo of Eliza in the other. This time, she didn't descend out of fear. She descended out of empathy. The tunnel was colder now, but it didn't scare her. The jars still lined the shelves, and the fluttering had stilled, as if they sensed something had changed. In the center of the stone room, Faye sat cross-legged. She lit a candle, held the photo in her lap, and whispered, "I know your name now." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. And then, for the first time, she saw something new, a second journal, tucked behind a loose brick. This one was newer, not from Eliza. From a woman named Martha Jean Thomas, the last owner before the house sat empty for 20 years. Her first entry said, "I know I'm not crazy. She only wants to be remembered. I just wasn't strong enough to finish what she started." Faye closed the journal, tears welling in her eyes. She understood now. The knocking wasn't a threat. It was a call. And finally, after generations of silence, someone answered. In the days that followed, the house grew quiet. Not the uneasy kind of quiet, but something softer, like whatever had been holding its breath had finally exhaled. Faye noticed it in small ways. The mirrors stopped fogging in the middle of the night. The cold spots that once haunted the stairwell began to warm. The dreams became clearer, less frantic, more like memories drifting to the surface. She didn't have answers for everything, but she had purpose now, and that was enough. One morning, as she sat on the porch sipping instant coffee, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize lit up the screen. She hesitated. then answered. "Ms. Hollis speaking. My name's Miriam Brooks. I'm a folklore archivist at the University of Florida. I was forwarded a message from the Cassadaga Historical Society. Something about a journal you found." Faye blinked. Yeah, 2 journals, actually. One from the 1890s, one from the early 2000s. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "We've been looking for documentation on that house for years. It's a missing piece of a very strange puzzle. Would you be willing to meet?" Faye glanced toward the window, where the cracked mirror still hung like a half-told story. "Yes," she said. "I think it's time people knew." They met 2 days later at Dinah's Diner off Highway 44. Faye brought both journals in a canvas bag, along with a flash drive full of photos, the jars, the tunnel, the circle of stones, the carved word return. Miriam was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and unshakable. She listened without interrupting, only nodding as Faye explained everything down to the whispering in the walls. When Faye finally finished, Miriam leaned back and exhaled. "You're not the first person to feel something in that house." Faye raised an eyebrow. "No." Miriam opened her laptop and turned it toward her. A black and white photo appeared the farmhouse, exactly as it looked today. Only this one was dated 1952. In the margin was a name, E. Harper. "We believe Eliza Harper never left the property. Not in spirit. But no one ever proved what happened to her." The town whispered. The family vanished. And the house, well? It sat like a scar no one wanted to touch. She tapped the screen again. That circle of stones. It appears in local records from as early as 1879. But it predates even that. Indigenous people in this region used similar sites as places of offering and mourning. Faye looked down at her coffee, the weight of everything settling deeper. Miriam leaned forward. "What you have isn't just personal. It's historical, cultural, and possibly sacred." Faye nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" It started with a simple decision. Open the house. Not as a museum, not as a haunted tourist trap, but as a space to remember, to honor, to listen. With Miriam's help and a few grant applications, the basement was cleaned and structurally reinforced. The jars were carefully removed and catalogued. Faye refused to let them be put in glass cases or boxed away in some university vault. "They stay here," she insisted. "This was their resting place. Their memory lives here." Each jar was given its own alcove in what Faye now called the memory room. Above them, she hung pieces of the journal's pages enlarged, framed, lit by soft lamps that hummed with warm light. Word spread slowly. First, a woman from Georgia called. Her grandmother had mentioned a girl in a white dress from Cassadaga who used to visit her dreams as a child. Then came a letter from a man in North Carolina who said his great-aunt had once lived in the house and swore it whispered to her at night. Then came the families. People who had once owned the house. People who had almost bought it and backed out last minute. People who had ancestors buried in unmarked graves near Cassadaga. All of them came with questions, and tears, and names. Faye greeted each of them the same way with an open door. She didn't pretend to be an expert. She didn't claim to understand all of it. But she listened. And that, somehow, was enough. One evening, as she stood on the front steps, watching the sun set over the live oaks, Faye saw someone standing at the edge of the yard. A girl, maybe 10 years old, hair in 2 long braids. Faye blinked and she was gone. But in her place, nestled in the grass, was a single jar. Inside a moth, wings folded like prayer. Faye knelt, picked it up gently, and whispered, "Welcome home." That night, she placed the jar in the center of the room, and for the first time since the house had been hers, it felt whole. They say opportunity knocks, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it taps, quietly, from inside the walls, from beneath the floor, from the echo of a name forgotten by time. And sometimes it waits for someone like Faye Hollis, someone who doesn't run when things creak, someone who understands that some stories aren't meant to be solved, just shared, someone who can turn a haunted house into a place of healing, and in doing so, finally give voice to the ones who were never heard. Faye Hollis thought she had come to Casadaga to escape, but somewhere between the whispers in the walls and the jars lined with forgotten life, she realized this place hadn't trapped her. It had chosen her. She was no longer just the woman who bought a broken house for a fresh start. She was now the keeper of stories too painful for others to carry. And for the first time in her life, she didn't try to fix what was broken with her hands. She tried with her heart. But healing isn't linear. And grief doesn't leave just because you open a few windows and let the light in. One evening in late autumn, she received a letter. No return address, just a single line across the front. You weren't supposed to survive that house. Inside was an old photograph torn at the edges. It showed the house in black and white, and her, Faye, standing in the doorway. Only it couldn't be her, because the date scrawled on the back read November 1947. Faye dropped the photo. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred. For the first time in weeks, the fear returned not from the house, but from something deeper. Who was she really? She called Miriam in a panic. This photo, I don't understand. That's me. But it can't be. Miriam came that night. They laid out the journals again, the land records, the old census lists, and slowly, a pattern emerged. There was always a woman, always alone, always named with an F. Florence, Frances, Faith, Faye. Every generation, every 20 years, and each one vanished. Except her. Faye stared at the timeline, hands trembling. Am I just the next one? Miriam took her hand. Or maybe you're the one who breaks the pattern. Later that night, the dreams came back. But this time, Faye didn't see the woman in white. She saw herself younger, in a dusty garage, working beside her father. She heard his voice again, thick with oil and wisdom. There's two kinds of broken. Faye, he said, the kind that needs fixing, and the kind that needs feeling. She woke up crying, because for the first time, she realized she'd never let herself grieve. Not for her father, not for the marriage that ended in silence, not for the children she never had, not for herself. She had buried it all under steel, silence, and tools, just like the house had done for over a century. That morning, Faye did something she hadn't done in years. She stood in the memory room, surrounded by jars, and let herself break. She wept. For Eliza, for the women who came before, for the girl she used to be. And when the tears ran dry, she didn't feel empty. She felt reborn. A week later, a girl named Rosie came to the house with her grandmother. Rosie was 9, shy, clutched a worn notebook to her chest like it held the world. She hears things, the grandmother whispered. Says she talks to someone named Eliza. Faye knelt down. What does Eliza tell you? Rosie opened her notebook. Every page was filled with drawings of the house, the jars, the woman in white. She says she's not alone anymore. Rosie said, because you stayed. Faye's throat tightened. Her hand trembled as she touched the corner of Rosie's notebook. She says, Rosie added, that you can stop now. The house is okay. Faye blinked fast, trying to keep it together. And what about me? She asked softly. Rosie smiled, the kind of smile only a child could give, pure and absolute. She says, it's time you start living again. That night, Faye sat on the porch, fireflies blinking in the yard, the warmth of fall brushing against her skin. And for the first time since she'd set foot on that broken porch months ago, she let go. Not of the house, not of the past, but of the weight that told her she was never enough. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Eliza," because in saving the girl who was forgotten, Faye had saved herself. They say courage is loud, that it comes with fists raised and voices shouting in the streets. But Faye Hollis learned the truth. Courage is quiet. It shows up in the early morning light, when no one else is watching. It stands on creaking floorboards, listens to voices no one else believes in, and chooses to stay. And somehow, that was enough to change everything. Months passed, and her house became something no one could have predicted. The front porch, once sagging and gray, now stood strong beneath fresh paint and hanging flower baskets. Children from nearby towns came on weekends to tour the memory room, their small fingers tracing the names on journal pages, their wide eyes full of questions. People brought offerings now not out of fear, but out of respect. Old letters, broken trinkets, photographs of women no one remembered until Faye said their names out loud. She'd created something the town didn't know it needed. Not a museum, not a ghost tour, a sanctuary, a place for unfinished stories. One morning, a man parked an old truck by the fence and stepped out slowly. He was tall, weathered, with hands like leather and eyes that held too many winters. He didn't speak as he walked up the steps, just held out a folded piece of paper. Faye took it and opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, sepia-toned, torn at the edges. A girl in a white dress, standing beneath the live oaks. On the back, Eliza Harper, my great-aunt. We thought she vanished. But I guess she was just waiting. The man looked down, voice trembling. I never believed the stories. I used to think this town just liked to forget things. But you didn't. You brought her back. Faye blinked, tears threatening to spill. She reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "She never really left. She was just waiting for someone to remember." More people came. Some brought names, some brought grief, all brought hope. They came with wounds they hadn't known how to name until they walked through her door, and Faye, oil-stained, soft-spoken Faye gave them what the world had taken. Validation. Peace. A place to belong. And through it all, Eliza stayed. Not as a whisper anymore. Not as a flicker in the corner of a mirror. But as a presence, a warmth, a hush of wind in the curtains when the stories were told just right. A faint laugh when Rosie ran through the halls. Sometimes, when Faye stood in the circle of stones at dusk, she'd hear it again. "You stayed." And she'd answer, simply, "So did you." The town of Casadaga began to shift, slowly but surely. People who once avoided the old farmhouse now left flowers on the gate. The high school history class started a project cataloging forgotten residents. And the local library named a reading room after Eliza Harper. Even the skeptics, the ones who once rolled their eyes, started showing up. Not for proof, but for presence. Because what Faye had built didn't need proof. It just needed belief. One evening, as golden light spilled across the porch, Rosie curled up beside Faye with a sketchbook in her lap. "I drew something," she said softly. Faye smiled. "Let's see." Rosie flipped to the last page. It was a picture of the house, but not as it used to be. As it was now. Windows glowing, trees swaying, people smiling on the porch steps. And in the top window, a girl in a white dress, watching, but this time, smiling. Faye closed her eyes. For the first time in years, her heart didn't feel heavy. It felt whole. Not because the house was perfect, but because it was honest. It had wounds, just like she did. But it had healed. So had she. And somehow, in honoring the forgotten, she had finally remembered who she was meant to be. Because sometimes, a woman buys a crumbling farmhouse for $1 just looking for peace. But what she finds is a truth bigger than walls and whispers. She finds a purpose, a home, and a reason to stay. Anyone can change the world not by shouting, not by fighting, but by staying when it would be easier to walk away. Faye Hollis didn't set out to be brave. She didn't come to Casadaga to be remembered. All she wanted was a quiet place to breathe. But when the house whispered, she listened. When the past reached out, she held it with care. And when no one else would stay, she did. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who fix the world. They're the ones who sit beside its broken pieces and say, "You still matter." Faye didn't become a hero in the traditional sense. She became something more powerful. A witness, a protector, a living reminder that even forgotten lives still echo when someone cares enough to hear them. And in doing so, she taught us this. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to stay. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the past deserves to be remembered.